So today we're going to explore a topic, and it's going to kind of skim the surface of actual practice. So if you're interested in learning a little bit about protection and different types of practices that might have been done, here's a great video for you. So today's topic is going to be witch marks. I saw a TikTok video, and in this TikTok video, this individual in Scotland was talking about these symbols that were put on over fireplaces and stuff, and that they were supposed to protect against witches and different types of evil and stuff, because inside the Scottish homes, all of the windows could be closed and the doors and everything. The only opening they had was the fireplace, which is open to outside. So they'd put these marks over the fireplace to trap evil or to trap witches in. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. And then in the comments, there was an individual who said, that's funny, they're using witchcraft to protect against witchcraft. And I'm like, wait a minute, no, they're not. That's not witchcraft if it's to protect against witchcraft. So that got me looking in and trying to find out what these symbols were. I found a little bit of information. I'll share some resources below. But basically what we're looking at is symbols like this. So apparently this is commonly called a witch mark. I've got a few examples here. I'm not going to really show a whole ton because I want to talk about them a little bit more than just show off a couple of them. But the idea here is, first and foremost, I want to talk very, very briefly on why I'm not considering this witchcraft at all. So apparently, witch marks, according to one source, are saying they date back to 3000 BCE. And I'm like, I don't know about that. Most of the sources, there are two of them that I brought up specifically because there's plenty of resources out there, suggest that they came about in the 16th and 17th century. The term witchcraft itself would have come about somewhere in the 15th century, is the oldest record I can find in English law. So when this person's like, oh, they're using witchcraft to protect against witchcraft, I'm like, not necessarily. Because when the term witchcraft was used in areas like Scotland, because Scotland was already Christian at that point in the 16th, 17th century, when the term in English, witch, okay, some people want to argue, oh, if anything's pre-Christian, it's witchcraft. That's a different conversation. I've made a different video related to that kind of conversation. I want to keep that separate. The term in English, witch, did not exist pre-Christian. It just didn't. It's a more, like I said, 15th century on, we have the term, and the way it was written down, it was a bad and evil thing. So having the idea of something that's a protective symbol to protect against things, specifically if they're going to say this is going to protect against witchcraft, which might not have been its only purpose. It could have been for protection against evil in general. I wouldn't call this witchcraft. Just because it's pre-Christian doesn't necessarily make it witchcraft, or pagan for that matter. It's just a cultural thing, a cultural practice that was continued to be practiced. And again, a lot of these marks, according to some of the sites that I'm seeing, suggest that they came about in the 16th, 17th century, so they came about after witchcraft in a way to protect against them and other types of evil. So here's a couple of the sites. So this site here is historicengland.org.uk, and it talks about telling difference between an apotropaic mark and carpenter's marks, and it gives some examples, and then there's Marian symbols and all this type of stuff, burn marks that you'll see, and then pentacles. And I know this is not a pentacle, so this is where it's talking about here. These intriguing marks are very ancient, being recorded as far back as 3000 BC. Now, I don't use the term BC, I use BCE, before Common Era, versus before Christ, because not being a Christian and being more scientific with it. Although, in more recent centuries, it has become a symbol of evil, during the medieval period it was used to avert it, and is thought to have been intended to act as a way to trap evil spirits into the endless lines, which goes along the idea of practice and actual implementation here. So this is just one example here, and again, more about witch marks. This site is the historyofmassachusetts.org, talks about what witch marks are, when they might have been used, and this will bring up stuff here like talking about, again, the 16th century. So here's an example of that, just to back up that claim. And then, of course, here, the idea of witch marks didn't exist at all during the Middle Ages, or even during the beginning of the European witch craze in the 15th century. It didn't emerge in witch hunting until early 16th century. So again, it's like, is this one over here, because it specifically says pentagrams, or pentacles, it says pentacles here, which would be a star inside of a circle, as you'll typically see if you look up pentacles versus pentagram, which is the star by itself. And it says, oh, 3,000. So are we talking about images, period, because there's more than one image here? Or are we specifically talking about the witch mark because we have conflicting evidence here? So again, always look at multiple resources and then question how accurate these resources are. So this is an interesting read. And then this last one here that I wanted to bring up as well is CountryLiving.com, which I thought fascinating. And it's 6 things you need to know about witch markings according to an ancient graffiti expert. So take that for what it is. Again, think about who's writing this and how accurate these sources might be. So this gives some different patterns here. Talks about what are witch markings or hex foils. And then it talks about some different symbols and different ways of drawing some of these. It seems like the most common one was this daisy inside this ring type of video that they're talking about. And it gives some examples down here at the bottom of common witch marks that you might find in old homes. So, and then clockwise from the left, so we're going, clockwise. So there's a hex foil and then a concentric circles. And then there's a butterfly cross. Then there's a VV and AM markings, which is down here. Then we have spectacles. And then we have a pelta, also known as a Solomon's knot. So, yeah, there's just a couple things to consider and look at with these. So I guess in theory, the idea was you put these up and then whether it be a witch in a non-corporeal form trying to sneak into a place or magical spells that were evil coming your way or an evil spirit that's being summoned against you or just coming after you would go into these patterns and go into an endless loop being stuck inside this maze. So it's kind of like drawing them in. It's interesting that there's also fictional shows like Supernatural which have devil traps, and the devil trap has, maybe it works in a similar fashion, but in that fictional TV show, you have like a demon walk into one of these devil traps and they're locked and they can't leave that space. And it seems very similar to this idea of having a symbol that someone or something can't cross. So it's definitely an interesting thing. I thought I would bring it up. I don't know, have you heard of witch marks before? Or even hex foils? What do you know about them, and which sites and sources do you have for more detail and information around them? The idea of putting up protection symbols around houses, though, is definitely an old practice that does predate Christianity, regardless of what the symbol is. People, protect through symbology. People protect through belief and faith. There's different types of practices, like with horseshoes, and there's arguments of whether you put it up or down. Different video for that type of a topic and conversation. And in a future video, I'll bring up witch bottles and how they might have worked in some of these things that people are finding in houses, which are like these little vials with stuff inside of them, such as bent nails, and what they were for as well. So anyway, thank you for watching. As always, interact with these videos. If you like them, leave your thoughts below, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching.